This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
I hope everyone's having a great weekend out there. Welcome to another episode on the Detroit Sports Podcast Network. This is the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast, our 15th edition, where we rank the top 5 stories in the world of Detroit sports. Now we're coming into the middle of February. The NFL season has ended. Some people would argue that the Super Bowl wasn't all that great. A strong defensive effort by Denver propelled them to a Super Bowl title. The Denver Broncos are the world champions. And so now here in Detroit, we turn away a little bit our attention from football, while definitely we're going to be peeking in at the NFL draft, what's going to happen should Calvin Johnson retire, what is going to happen now with the new regime with Bob Quinn. A little bit now, we're going to turn our attention to baseball with pitchers and catchers reporting this very Thursday. So a lot of us are going to be peeking into the Tigers, the Pistons, and Red Wings, and we are going to get a chance to evaluate what they're going to do in the second half of the seasons. The Pistons and Red Wings are both at interesting points right now. The Pistons are now on the All-Star break, and the Red Wings are coming off a stretch where they played a little bit better, and Peter Mrazek has really shown with that shutout streak that was recently ended why he is the number one goalie in Detroit, and people are now arguing that Peter Mrazek is one of the elite goaltenders already in his early career. So we're gonna talk about a lot of different things on this Detroit Sports Countdown podcast. But first and foremost, what we do is, before we start the top 5, there's some news and notes that don't make the top 5, but we call the Kenny Frenzel honorable mentions. Michigan basketball gets a little hit here on the podcast. They played a solid game versus Purdue. A lot of people are talking a little bit about Michigan and the opponents that they faced. Do they have any quality wins? Should they make a tournament push? But they played a solid game against Purdue on Saturday at home in front of a nice crowd at Chrysler Center, and they defeated Purdue 61-56. Now, I'm sure people out there that are watching Michigan basketball a little bit disappointed following that thumping that occurred at the hands of Michigan State at Chrysler Center, but they rebounded nicely, and a lot of people are talking about Michigan basketball in terms of, hey, they don't really play defense, they are reliant too heavily upon the three-point shot, and when they don't consistently hit their shots and they don't play quality defense, then they struggle like they have been in recent games. But they put everything together, they rebounded nicely, and they showed some grit in defeating a ranked team, and you need to do that. A team like Michigan, who's going to try to make a postseason push in terms of trying to earn a bid for the NCAA tournament, is going to need some wins like this against Purdue in the Big Ten in order to really show the committee, should they be a bubble team, hey, what do we have to offer? And the return of Karis LeVert, you definitely don't want to discount that. A team like Michigan could be a team that gets better as the season progresses and may have to have strong showings in the Big Ten tournament and strong showings to finish out the regular season as well. Michigan's week, having a nice victory over Purdue, makes the Kenny Frenzel honorable mention list. A quick couple tidbits from the Detroit Lions make the Kenny Frenzel honorable mention list. They've been searching for a long time for a quarterbacks coach since Jim Bob Cooter was promoted and has been working with Matthew Stafford and was named the new offensive coordinator when Joe Lombardi was let go. So the Lions reached out and got the quarterback coach from the Denver Broncos, Brian Callahan, who spent the last 6 years with Denver and who's worked with Peyton Manning, obviously, and has ultimately now come to the Detroit Lions organization with a Super Bowl ring. I think it's a great move. I think that the Lions are doing what they can to surround themselves with a winning organization, individuals that have experience in coaching in terms of helping out Matthew Stafford. What better place to look at than the Denver Broncos? Brian Callahan has worked with Jim Bob Cooter when they were both offensive assistants in 2013. That season in 2013 was the season when they advanced to the Super Bowl before losing to the Seahawks. So another addition for the Detroit Lions on that staff. So I agree with that move. I think that any opportunity you can find to improve the coaching staff and to help out Matthew Stafford, I'm all for it. And then finally, Martin Mayhew makes the news blotter a little bit. In a surprise move a little bit. Some people thought that he might get another general manager job after his stint in Detroit. It seems like he's well respected, but he ends up with the New York Giants in the front office. He'll be working with the Giants as the Director of Pro Football Operations / Special Projects. Man, his first gig outside of Detroit, he had an internship with the Redskins in 1999, and then he came over to the Lions, he worked with Matt Millen, and then when Matt Millen was unceremoniously let go, then Martin Mayhew took the job. Now, the interesting part of that whole saga was once Millen was fired, I'm totally shocked that the Lions even considered any of his input with the record that he produced. At the time, he's orchestrated an 0-16 season, and in that sense, you're like, okay, Matt Millen was a disaster as a GM. Why would anybody from that regime really even have any legs to stand on in terms of keeping their jobs? But Martin Mayhew did, and he was very low-key and, led the Lions to a couple playoff seasons, but his draft record, when you really look at it, is abysmal. And the last couple really have hurt this team and could potentially set this team back for years to come when you have situations where Calvin Johnson and Ndamukong Suh have left and the cupboard might look a little bare. And so the draft is going to be a situation now going forward where they're going to heavily rely upon the draft to restock the talent that's already left here in Detroit. And so when people out there are saying potentially that the Lions could be in the Super Bowl this upcoming season, it makes it really a tough thing to look at when you look at you're going to be relying upon a lot of rookies and a lot of talent with a lot of question marks. Are returning DeAndre Levy? How does Darius Slay fit in if he gets a new contract? Does Ziggy Ansah continue to contribute? Does he get better? Who are you going to do to replace some of the players that may leave, like a Haloti Ngata, like a Calvin Johnson? So in that sense, I don't think it's realistic to put the Lions as Super Bowl contenders, but I do think that an emphasis on the draft will help this team rebuild, and with a lighter schedule could help them make a playoff appearance in 2016. And again, with everything with the Lions, you have to wait and see what Matthew Stafford does, because in the end, a lot of the success of the Lions is going to be incumbent upon how Matthew Stafford responds to not having his biggest and best target in Calvin Johnson. So we'll all wait to see. All right, before we get into the countdown, I want to thank our fine sponsors, Fanatic U, Detroit Beard Collective, Team Top Cat Sales. Without the help of our fine sponsors, then we couldn't put on these great podcasts week in, week out, have a strong network. And so we greatly appreciate their support. And for those of you out there who want great sports gear, definitely check out fanaticu.com. And whenever you shop online there, if you want to buy great gear, use the promo code DSP. That's promo code DSP for Detroit Sports Podcast. And if you use that promo code, you'll save 15% off your entire order. And that promo code is good 24/7. 15% off your entire order. Don't hesitate. Use that promo code fanaticu.com. All right, the number 5 story this week. Lots of talk again regarding Jim Harbaugh. I mean, dude can't escape the media. Dude can't escape scrutiny with any situation. A lot of news and notes regarding Jim Harbaugh this week in terms of the fact that he wants to have spring practice in Florida, maybe in Texas, and he wants to take the team on another road trip and really rack up some expenses. Now, it's caused a wrinkle in that the SEC has come out and said, hey now, what the hell are you guys doing? No, they want to try to block that move. And so now a lot of discussion has come up regarding Jim Harbaugh and what is this man willing to do in order to get ahead? What is he willing to do in order to build this Michigan program? A report came out earlier this week in terms of the financial number that he spent in his first month recruiting with Michigan. Jim Harbaugh, if you give him some funds, dude knows how to spend. I give him credit. If you have the ability for 12 days to spend on average of $10,000 on private planes, all kudos to you. If that's what you're going to do to gallivant around town, gallivant around the United States to get the talent, all for it. What an interesting report. $10,000 a day for 12 days straight to go out and try and find some recruits to help the Michigan program. Now you could say, well, it got 10 wins this year. It's got Michigan back to respectability. They had a strong finish to the season. And so if that's what the big boys do, if that is what is available to him, all credit to him. I don't blame him at all. I mean, if you have an open checkbook, and I mean, I do believe that Michigan is going to do whatever it takes to support Jim Harbaugh and the university football program in order to have success. That is the ultimate goal. Then Jim Harbaugh is going to spend a lot. So now, are you willing to potentially spend in order to take the entire football program down to Florida or Texas for spring practice? Now, Mark D'Antonio called the story very creative and said, you know what? if this is the landscape and it's within the rules, because Jim Harbaugh's not breaking any rules, this is well within the rules, he's more than allowed to do this, then Michigan State might look to follow suit. And so the NCAA really has an interesting dilemma on their hands in that in order to keep a fair playing field, do you allow this to happen? Do you allow teams to practice, allow young kids who are student athletes to miss out on spring break in order to practice football? A lot of people will argue, well, then you really, again, this is another sign of taking the student out of student athlete because the rest of the student population has that week off. And now you're forcing these young kids to, have a trip and also practice. Some people say it's not a vacation. They're going to be expected to produce and expected to practice, stay healthy. And so the NCAA is going to have an interesting question on their hands in terms of, whether or not they're going to allow this to continue. Because if Michigan starts that trend and other Big Ten teams want to go do that, then you're going to have what we call an arms race. If Jim Harbaugh has a private plane that he's able to use, why doesn't Michigan State have a private plane so that Mark D'Antonio can go out and get the best players? Some people will say, hey, now, are teams now in the Big Ten at a disadvantage if Michigan is going to try and continue to do things that not a lot of teams are doing right now? So either you catch up and you follow suit or you fall behind. So I give Jim Harbaugh credit. I mean, he's putting the pedal to the metal and looking at every crevice, every avenue that he can find to help this Michigan team win. He's going to go find it. And I appreciate a guy like that. That's a big sign of success for him. And so Jim Harbaugh thinking about taking the team down south in SEC country, the number 5 story this week in Detroit sports. The number 4 story this week, Peter Mrazek and the week that was for him. In 2010, when the draft came for the Detroit Red Wings, you said, okay, what's this team going to need to rebuild after a 2009 season? And so in 2010, by all accounts, they got a steal in Peter Mrazek. If you look at where Peter Mrazek was drafted, in the 5th round in 2010, and look what he's produced now relatively early in his career. Last season, a lot of talk, and we had a chance to have a conversation with Ken Kell on our podcast, the Doc and Jock podcast, which comes out every Thursday. We had a chance to say, listen, we're starting to see signs that Peter Mrazek could be the guy. And Ken Kell was very cordial and polite and respectful and said that Jimmy Howard's the guy. He has more of the experience, but Peter Mrazek was going to get more and more of a look because he does have that talent. And when Jimmy Howard was struggling in all those shootouts last season, you started to say, okay, when Peter Mrazek's in there, he has that it factor. He's making some key saves, and he has the ability maybe to be able to start that playoff series versus Tampa Bay, which he did. Now, eventually they lost that series, but it really wasn't the fault of Peter Mrazek. At key moments, the Red Wings weren't able to match Tampa Bay and what they had to offer, and they just weren't able to close them out after starting the series out with a significant lead. But now in this season, Peter Mrazek and Jimmy Howard were named co-starting goaltenders, but you knew if Peter Mrazek was able to be featured, if he got into a lot of different situations, that he would be the guy. And Peter Mrazek has been stellar. And he had a stellar week. He had a significant shutout streak that was ended by a not-so-great defensive effort on that one particular play where he gave up, where Peter Mrazek got scored upon. But Peter Mrazek's a confident guy. He has the ability to bounce back. I mean, the guy... You can tell if a goal goes in, doesn't get rattled, he just moves on to the next shot, and he has the ability to just look ahead, look forward, and he has that killer mentality that you can tell that he's able to really kind of reminds you of Dominik Hasek in a sense, in that when he's in the net, when Dominik Hasek was at his prime, when he was playing great, you really believe that it would take a miracle goal to get in, and Peter Mrazek has that in him. So he had a great shutout streak this week. Peter Mrazek's shutout streak had reached 133 minutes, 29 seconds before Zach Smith scored with about 2 minutes left in that game versus Ottawa. I mean, Peter Mrazek has come out and he's got a stellar record and he's got a really strong save percentage and he's got the ability to lead this team. And it's fairly evident based on the struggles of Jimmy Howard that Peter Mrazek's the number one guy, and he's going to take this team really far in the playoffs if he has strong success. Peter Mrazek has a strong skill set. He's got the personality of a winning goaltender, and he's just a dominant force. And now those around the NHL are starting slowly to realize the capability of this man, and he's really playing well, and he's really he's really giving the Red Wings a chance to earn those key 2 points each and every game. Because right now, with the way the East is bunched up, each and every game is causing, just like in the NBA with the Pistons, each and every game that the Red Wings play and they have a chance to earn 2 points is affecting the standings significantly. So when the teams are all jumbled up like that, each and every game is important. And so I really believe that Jeff Blashill has brought Peter Mrazek along very well. Jimmy Howard's just getting in there in the back ends of back-to-back games, and he struggled mightily. We need to get him back on track rather quickly because two things are now occurring because of Jimmy Howard's struggle. One, his trade value plummets in that who's going to take on that contract when he's playing this poorly? And two, should Peter Mrazek have some kind of fluke injury? Should his play dip just a little bit? You need that other goaltender just in case something happens, or Peter Mrazek in a playoff series just absolutely bombs one game. Then what are you going to do? Are you going to go to Jimmy Howard? No one's going to be confident, so Jimmy Howard needs to pick it up. He needs to find whatever it is that he had last year when he started off the season so strong, and even in the early parts of this year, he played a little bit more consistent. So Jimmy Howard needs to pick it up, and Peter Mrazek's play this week has elevated him to the number 4 story this week in the world of Detroit sports. The number 3 ranked story, great news for the Detroit Tigers and their fans. J.D. Martinez avoided arbitration, and he resigned with the Detroit Tigers. El Avila has really had a remarkable offseason in terms of adding talent, keeping the guys that we really feel like are going to be needed to help this team make a strong postseason push and help them get back to the top of the AL Central Division. And so a 2-year deal for $18.5 million. $6.75 million will be due to him in 2015. $11.75 million will be due to him in the 2017 season. So it really shapes up to be a fair deal for both parties. JD Martinez doesn't break the bank this year when he was slotted to make potentially between $8 and $9 million should he hit arbitration, and he now makes 6.75. And based on his numbers, wow, what a bargain. You could argue that he could have legitimately made between $15 and $18 million this year based on the numbers that he produced in 2015. So JD Martinez will not hit free agency until the age of 30, and JD will be considered a significant cog with the Detroit Tigers, and he'll be counted upon to really contribute a lot of home runs, a lot of RBIs, a lot of key hits, and by all accounts, we all believe that he will contribute. J.D. Martinez now is going to be a focal point in that offense. When you look at it, that batting lineup has the potential on some nights to do some real damage. And so, when you look at it, you're going to have Victor Martinez, Miguel Cabrera, Justin Upton, Castellanos, Iglesias. You're going to have a lineup that is going to be fierce. And some nights the pitchers are not going to be able to get through that lineup consistently. And so with a potent offense like that, it does help out your pitching staff. And so that is the goal. The goal will be to help out that pitching staff by giving more runs, helping out that bullpen by, not having to be in so many tight games. If you recall last season, there were so many games where they had leads and they were giving up late, and there were so many games where there were so many one-run games that really made it difficult for the pitching staff to pitch more freely because they were always under pressure. The Detroit Tigers helped themselves greatly by bolstering the starting staff, by bolstering that bullpen, and by bolstering the offensive lineup. So all in all, the team is going to have a lot more success, I believe, in 2015, and I do believe that they're going to – I don't believe – a lot of the early projections that they're going to finish 3rd or 4th in the division. I think they're going to have a strong chance to come back and do some damage. I don't know about World Series, but I do believe if everything shakes up true to form, they're going to have a lot of success in this season. Moving right along, the last couple stories are going to involve the Detroit Pistons. They finished out the first half of the year 27-27. They haven't been that consistent. KCP's been hurt. The defense has been non-existent. So they entered the All-Star break kind of limping, and now there's a lot more question marks than we have answers. But the week that was for the Pistons was fairly positive in terms of PR, in terms of some accolades for some current and former Detroit Pistons. The number 2 ranked story on the Detroit Sports Countdown podcast, Chauncey Billups got his number retired in a fabulous ceremony at the Palace versus Denver. Now, unfortunately, the Pistons didn't play a solid 48-minute game. They lost the game, but the ceremony was excellent. Another reminder, just like the reminder that we had with Ben Wallace, that the 2004 team had an integral part in NBA history and in the history of the Detroit Pistons. Chauncey Billups came to this team, kind of a vagabond player, a guy that was bounced around, and he'll admit it himself. He lacked confidence. He was really kind of shaken by the fact that so many organizations had given up on him, and he was just looking for that right fit, that right organization to take his skill set to the next level. And I really believe that that organization could only be the Detroit Pistons under Larry Brown. He came into a perfect fit, and credit needs to be given to Joe Dumars. I know a lot of people are questioning, well, why wasn't Joe at the ceremony, for Ben Wallace or for Chauncey Billups? Now, whether you believe he was in Europe watching his son, or there are still some, there's still some bad blood because Rip Hamilton was in the house, and the way it kind of shook out where Rip Hamilton re-signed with the Pistons only to learn basically a few moments later that Chauncey Billups had been traded. There could be some bad blood between some of the former players and Joe Dumars, but Chauncey showed the proper respect and said that, hey, Joe Dumars was the architect of that 2004 team, and, for the better part of the early years in 2000, from 2000 to 2010, the Pistons had a lot of success because of Joe Dumars. Now, the deconstruction of that team and Joe Dumars' ability to keep that success going ultimately led to his getting fired because he just wasn't able to successfully deconstruct that team and rebuild it in a way that would help to lead to continued success. It just didn't happen, and that's what happens in the NBA. There's a short memory in most of these big-time jobs, and if you don't produce consistently, then you're going to be fired. That's just the way it is. But Chauncey Billups was more than respectful. It was a great ceremony and another great night to celebrate with the old teammates that he had. A lot of the teammates came back, and, you could just sense that those guys were brothers. Those guys were going to be a close bunch, and it all worked out for the best. Now, with the Detroit Pistons, you just kind of wish that this current group would play just like the 2004 team, a little bit more hard on defense, a little bit more willingness to play together as a team, and a leader definitely needs to emerge. Everyone that you talk to, everyone on our podcast network will say, it's a young team, and a leader is not yet established on this team, a guy that can night in, night out bring it. You do have a lot of great talent on this team, but you need to produce on both ends of the floor. I mean, the Pistons right now are giving up 100 points like it's going out of style. They're not playing well on defense. Stan Van Gundy is going to need to address that and look at what the hell happened from the beginning of the year when they played really solidly on defense to the last stretch of 15, 20 games where their defense has just been atrocious. It hasn't been good at all. Now, there's been injuries. There's been, different mix of guys in and out of the rotation, but that defense has to come find its way back for this team to have success. But Chauncey Billups came back. It was a nice situation. It was nice to see him back. A lot of people were talking about Tom Gores and his loose presentation in terms of how he kind of shows up there without a tie. He kind of slurs his words a little bit. He kind of made, some faux pas in terms of announcing Chauncey family. But, in the end, when you look at Tom Gores, that's just kind of how he presents himself. Whether you agree or disagree, that's a matter of your opinion. But he has done a great job now of putting the pieces in place to maybe have success. It just now depends on these players and what's going to happen at the trade deadline, what Stan Van Gundy is going to decide to do in order to help this team go forward. Because as is, I don't know, it's going to be tight to get that 7th or 8th spot if they don't play much better. So the Chauncey Billups ceremony this week, the number 2 story in the world of Detroit sports. You've waited all this time. Thank you very much. I appreciate all those who download this podcast, who go to our Twitter page at Detroit Podcast. You can go there to find great contests. We give away a lot of shirts, hats, have a lot of giveaways from a lot of our friends here at the podcast at Detroit Podcast. So thank you for all those who have supported us. Thank you to those who visit our website, DetroitSportsPodcast.com. It makes it fun to have this project keep going now, strong since September of 2013, and we got a lot of great things in the works. All right, you've waited, you've paid attention, you've counted down along with me. The number 1 story this week in Detroit sports. Andre Drummond was part of a fabulous All-Star NBA competition on Saturday night. It was great to watch. Started off where I peeked in was the 3-point contest with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson doing their thing, going back and forth. And in the end, Klay Thompson just got on fire at the right time, and he won the three-point competition. And it just makes you go, dang, if Golden State has this much talent, how really fair is it for the rest of the league? You got the Splash Brothers, who really in the end can make three-pointers at a clip. They're pure shooters. And then you add to the mix a defensive wizard, a guy that's the heart of the team, Draymond Green, and you got yourself a recipe for a team that's going to have success for a long, long period of time. Golden State, woo-wee. Then you come along to the NBA dunk contest. And the number one story this week, Andre Drummond's participation in the dunk contest. Now, the results weren't that great. The concoction, the whole whatever he was trying to do with Steve Nash, I mean, his boy should have squashed that right away. Did you guys see out there what dunks were being performed by Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon? Oh my God. Several people in the media are like, wow, this dunk competition that took place and the epic dunks by Zach LaVine and Aaron Gordon were reminiscent of the days when Jordan would be in it and Dominique Wilkins, or days when Vince Carter was ruling the roost in the dunk competition. It was a great display. There were so many dunks that those two gentlemen put on that just had you jumping out of your seat like, whoa. I thought personally that Aaron Gordon won it with that dunk where he went under his legs and threw it down left-handed over the Orlando Magic mascot. That is ingenious. It was a dunk that I thought was well worthy to stand alone on its own to be the slam dunk champion. But in the end, Zach LaVine, the former champion, also had some great dunks, and his dunks didn't really need all that many props, just thunderous dunks, lots of height, lots of airtime. Wow. But Andre Drummond gets up there and does some dunks that were, well, okay, I would give it a 2-star out of 5, but the whole situation with Steve Nash was rather kind of embarrassing in that you go with the whole soccer style thing in terms of trying to get Steve Nash to kick the ball up to you, but you need a couple different tries to do it. So, and then, to add insult to injury, Andre Drummond comes out and is like, I'm not really a dunker, but, shout out to those that were throwing it down. If you follow him on Twitter, you can read his tweet, but you come out with that, you need to come out strong. And so a lot of people were questioning, what is Andre Drummond doing in the NBA dunk contest? I mean, have you seen the signature dunk? Have you seen a dunk where Andre Drummond posterized someone? No. So to have him be featured in the NBA's marquee competition that a lot of people like to watch, I'm kind of disappointed. I kind of felt like now, looking back at it, he didn't belong in the competition. I guess he can promote his brand and things like that, but in terms of choosing his dunks, weak. Steve Nash kicking the ball up to you. If you're going to try something like that, have your own boy do it. Have Reggie Jackson do it. Have a former Piston. Have something better. Have Hooper out there. I mean, that execution probably wasn't well thought out, and the teammates for the Pistons and his boys need to really take a look back and go, damn, just in comparison to what the other guys brought. It's reminiscent of middle school when it's show and tell, and everyone's bringing, video games, they're bringing these cool gadgets, and you go up there, you bring a book, and the whole class is like, psh. I had those days back in the day where I would bring in relatively stupid stuff. But Andre Drummond was weak in terms of his presentation in the NBA dunk contest. Oh, well, but, in the end, he did finish, I think, 4th. So what are you going to do? It wasn't a great performance by him, but the night was just elevated by an unbelievable display of dunks by the guys who brought it, LaVine and Gordon. So hopefully the All-Star game, which I'll peek into later this evening after I record this, will be fun. A lot of different All-Star games now, like the Pro Bowl and the NHL and Major League Baseball. They're trying to find ways to keep people motivated in watching it because, it's really an exhibition and sometimes it can get loose. And a lot of people are kind of looking at the Pro Bowl and going, does it really need to take place? NHL got rave reviews. The Major League Baseball All-Star game is talked about widely because it determines who will have the home field advantage in the World Series. So would you have an exhibition game count for that much? No. But it'll be fun, and we'll check out how Andre Drummond does. Maybe he'll be featured a little bit. Maybe he'll redeem himself from that performance. But he does get the accolade of earning a number 1 spot this week in the world of Detroit sports. Number 1 story, Andre Drummond in the NBA All-Star Dunk Competition. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. This has been the 15th edition of the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast. Thanks for listening every Sunday. I'm the Doc, John Macaroon. Look for more great one-on-ones. Check them out and check out our weekly rotation. Every Monday, the Hindsight 20 podcast. Every Tuesday, Motor City Sports Rant. Every Wednesday, Tigers Talk with Churko and Company. Thursday, Doc and Jock. Fantasy Nerds will kick off again this spring and summer. And you have the one-on-one podcast, which usually drop every Saturday. And then there's this marquee program, the Detroit Sports Countdown Podcast, each and every Sunday when I can get a chance. Trying my best. Of course, you got to take a week off for the Super Bowl. Was eating good, living life, having a good time. Thank you for listening. I appreciate your time. Thank you very much. See everybody next time.